Well, good morning, board. Good morning, Mr. Hostler and Mrs. Harrington. I'd like to call this meeting to order and welcome all the guests that are viewing now and will be viewing later at this time for the special board meeting. Roll call, please, Mrs. Harrington.
Mr. Bennington,
I am here.
Mrs. Downs,
Here.
Mrs. Eubank,
Here.
Ms. Larimer,
Here.
Mr. Pullman.
Here. At this time, could you please stand where you're at for the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge allegiance
To the flag
of the United States of
America,
America,
And to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible,
just
with liberty,
justice
justice for all.
Thank you. Time we'll need a motion to adopt the proposed agenda.
So moved.
Second,
Roll call, please, Mrs. Harrington.
Ms. Larimer,
Yes.
Mr. Bennington,
yes.
Mrs. Downs,
Yes.
Mrs. Eubank,
Yes.
Mr. Pullman.
Yes. Well, again, we thank you for being here this morning for the special meeting. And at this time, I'm going to turn over to Superintendent Mr. Hostler for a presentation of reopening schools. Hostler?
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Pullman. Much appreciated. And thank you, everyone, for making the time this morning to attend the special board meeting. We do have a presentation today and a little bit of background. We are preparing to start the 2020-2021 school year. And there's been a lot of planning that has gone into what that will look like. So we're going to talk about that this morning. Throughout the summer, we've done, I think, a fairly good job of communicating to the public and certainly to the board about the different options that we're facing as a school district in terms of reopening the school year. And so as we have looked at the different modes that were possible this fall, we were waiting for guidance from the governor, from the Ohio Department of Health. And so as we're moving forward, we've made plans. And now we're at a point where we have gotten the guidance from the governor's office, the Ohio Department of Health, and we're just, this is terrible to say in July, but we're like less than a month before things are up and running here in the school district. So at the last board meeting, Assistant Superintendent Price did a great job of walking through what the hybrid model could look like. And this again was before the governor gave their guidance. So we did a deep dive into that model. Today, what we wanted to do is really get into describing the why. Assistant Superintendent Price did a great job of describing the what is the hybrid and how it's going to function in a broad stroke. Today, we want to talk about the how, or the why. Why are we looking at this model? What has led us to this point? And then on Monday, we have another board meeting, a regularly scheduled board meeting. And then at that time, we'll be asking the board to approve the back to school plan. And at that board meeting, we're going to get into the actual, what is the plan? How is it going to work? So we'll kind of go through that a little bit more today. But if it's okay, I'd like to share my presentation with all of you at this time. So I'm going to do the screen share in just a moment. So
While you're doing that, Mr. Hostler, if I could ask the board to take notes on slides, take questions, and when Mr. Hostler's finished with this, we can certainly entertain all the questions and discussion that we would have.
yeah, so let me. So let me try to do this now. Everybody can see that?
I can see.
Yes. Yep.
All right. All right, we're in business. All right, so as I mentioned, we want to talk about the why behind the back to school plan for this upcoming school year. And so I think we wanted to start off with a simple statement, and that is, we want students to return to school every day. And I think that's important to put as our very first slide of this presentation, is that it is all of our goals to want students to return to school and to have a normal experience, from getting picked up in the morning by the bus to, attending weekend activities. We know how important it is that these things resume as soon as they can. We are also acknowledging that there are just things that happen when students aren't in school. And we've heard from many families who've said, we really want students to be back in school. And they've mentioned some of the social, emotional, physical detriments that students face. And we'll also talk today about some of the guidelines that have come out that, again, underscore the importance of getting students back to school. So I think it's very important for everyone to understand that that is our goal. That is what we want to do. And that's what we're preparing this recommendation to help us get there sooner than later. But we understand that with COVID right now continuing to spread throughout our community, things are going to look differently this fall. There's just no question about that. It's changed virtually every aspect of our lives. And to come into this school year thinking that somehow, with all the changes that have happened, from places we go to worship to how we purchase groceries, that returning to school somehow was going to be exempt from all of this, I don't think is a very realistic expectation. So we know that things are going to be different this year. So what is it going to look like? So what are we going to see? So this is just a little bit of a preview for Monday night. And I just want to walk us through so that we have an understanding of again, the why. Why are we preparing this recommendation for Monday? So the plan that we have put together is here up on the screen, and I'll just just take a moment so everybody can look at that, or do a screen capture, or all the things that folks want to do to do this. And this presentation will be posted and available following this meeting. So we know that and so I want to point out that the levels here are connected to the what the Ohio Department of Health has created. The governor announced it just a week ago, 2 weeks ago, in terms of where counties are and what things they may have to do based on what's happening in their communities. We've aligned our back to school plan to go with those those levels. So level 4, let's start at level 4. That's purple. Currently, we do not have any counties in level 4, and that would mean that there's all remote learning. Levels 2 and 3. The back to school plan would call for students in K through 6 would attend every 4 days a week, all day, and remote learning on Mondays, and 7 through 12. 50% of the students would attend, any particular day. And then if it goes to level 1, where there is active exposure and spread, all students K-12 would go 4 days a week, and we'd have a remote day on Monday. I also want to highlight that Perrysburg is offering any student that feels that is medically fragile, or the parents feel, the families feel that they cannot attend for whatever reason. There is a full remote option that Perrysburg will be offering those students. So, and we'll talk a little bit more about those options here. So just to kind of summarize, at level 1, there's less community spread and virus present. Therefore, more students can attend at the same time. Students in 7 through 12 will attend every day for 4 days. I mentioned levels 2 and 3. There's more virus present, there's more community spread, and there's greater risk for that. So with that, in grades 7 through 12, we are reducing the number of students that are attending each day. And again, the reason we're doing this is to better protect our students, our staff and families, and ultimately the communities. And we're trying to reduce disruption, and we'll talk about that. Because we understand and acknowledge that that is disruptive to the learning process to have students, instead of attending 5 days a week, to have a reduced schedule like we're proposing. But in the end, it is to reduce the chance of disruption. And then obviously at level 4, there's severe exposure and spread in the community. And that means there is, obviously a significant problem that's occurring. So as the county moves between levels 1, 2, and 3, we'll adjust our back to school hybrid plan. And I think that's important. We're not tied to this plan for the entire year. And we're not tied to this plan for the entire semester. We want this plan to react to the conditions that are happening in our community. And I think that's very important. So it allows that flexibility, and you're going to hear that word frequently, flexibility, because with this plan, we're entering the school year with a great deal of flexibility based on what's happening in the communities. And I think that's important. So this plan will move based on what we're hearing from community health, and we're going to make those adjustments. We're going to make them as soon as possible so families and teachers can transition. So when there is a change, if we're going from level 2 to level 1, we will announce, okay, we've changed levels, and this is when that's going to happen. So families have the ability to react. But we want to do it as soon as possible because, again, our goal is to one, try to get students back into a more normal routine, and 2, we want to protect students. So if you're moving up or down, we want to do that as soon as we can, but with a reasonable approach to families. If we are totally off this chart and it's not needed any longer, obviously we'll return to normal 5 days a week, normal routine, just like we started last school year. Also, I want to say that if we remain in level 1 for a number of days, of weeks, month, at some point, I think as a board, we want to have a discussion about, do we want to consult with the Wood County Health Department and maybe return to normal? And I think that is an important factor here, that we have the ability to, when we're in level 1 for a sustained period of time, based on the data that's happening, maybe a little more focused on our community in our area. If we're in a place where the health department is saying, we think that's not going to create a problem or a spike in your community, then let's move forward with that. So there's several options to find a path to get back to normal. But until then, we're laying out the parameters, the framework that we'll have to begin to build from. So we want to be clear that this doesn't replace our long-term instructional plan. And Perrysburg is not alone in having to adjust how we're operating. And we'll talk about that here shortly in other areas. Again, that word flexibility. We're going to have changing health conditions. Since the last time we met, we've had changing health conditions in our community, in our county, and even within our school district. And that is going to continue to happen. The county alert system is providing data in real time, and we've invited the Wood County Health Director, Ben Beatty, to join us a little bit later, and he can talk a little bit about what's happening in the community, a little bit about maybe our plan, and then this county level alert. This supports students who need to suddenly change and transition from face-to-face to remote instruction while being quarantined or with a positive diagnosis. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, because that is something that is going to be a reality as we move forward. And again, that potential disruption, and we'll spend a little bit of time on that, because I know people who are tuning in are saying, isn't it disruptive what you're proposing? And it is. But I think there's a potential if we don't come in with that kind of gradual return that we're proposing, that limits exposure, we could be setting ourselves up for an incredibly disruptive situation. So let's get into the why. The CDC, the Ohio Department of Health, Wood County Health Department, American Academy of Pediatrics, among others, are all offering us guidance. And that's something that is important to know, that there is not a mandate that this is how you have to operate schools, but there is guidance. And there's some subtle differences from a lot of the leading organizations that people look to in a time of, for guidance in this time. So this is something that I pulled out of each of these recommendations right from their report. And I think everybody pulls into the part of the report as we began our meeting. Students need to be back in school. That was our very first slide. And when you look at these reports, all of them start with a similar aspiration. Students need to be back in school. And a lot of people read that opening line and then they close the report and they say, see, all of these organizations are saying students need to be back in school. They're not necessarily flipping through the 60 pages of recommendations as to how to do that safely. So when it comes to social distancing, which drives some of our plan, their recommendations, I wanted just to share with you, in each of these plans, social distancing is an important component. So whether they're saying words like feasible, should try when possible to maintain, should be placed 3 to 6 feet apart when feasible. And we have a responsibility to try to follow these guidelines, and weighing that against our very first slide, which is it's important to get students back. And I think our plan tries to thread that needle very well in bringing that balance. Just pulling a deeper dive into some of these, so identifying small groups and keeping them together is called cohorting. And we want to keep the students and staff as static as possible by having the same group of children stay with the staff. So when we talk about our plan in grades K through 6, being able to attend every day, and 4 days a week, we have basically reworked our entire schedules in grades K through 6 to do exactly this, to keep a small group together, to make sure that contact is being reduced significantly. So the students come into their class, their homeroom, their teacher, and basically, and Monday we'll get into the specifics of what that's going to look like. But some people have said, well, if you can keep the elementary students together in a cohort, well, why not the high school? Why not the junior high? And in the world of education, when you have students in grades K through 6, you have one teacher primarily for a subject. And every first grader gets the same math. Every first grader gets the same reading instruction, maybe at different levels, but it's the same teacher in the same setting. So it is very easy to encapsulate them. At the high school level, Gretchen and I and Sue, we're all freshmen, but Sue may be taking geometry, and Gretchen's taking algebra, and I'm taking basic math. But then we all have the same 9th grade English course. But then I go to American Sign Language, and Gretchen goes to Spanish, Sue goes to French. It is nearly impossible to cohort a group like that. But we can, in each class, reduce the number of students that are attending. So we've given this a lot of thought in terms of how can we balance the need for younger students who need to be in school more frequently because they're less independent. And again, I think our plan provides that kind of balance. So the CDC, again, highlights the 6 feet apart. They go on to say that, that when it comes to when possible to maintain that distance, and we'll get into the broad strokes of how that will affect the classroom, hallways, restrooms, cafeteria, all those other areas that go around, because it's not just the classroom. And in a letter to staff that went out yesterday, their voice is going to be very important in this process, because as we get to explaining the why behind the recommendation, Monday, you're going to hear what is the recommendation. And if we're fortunate to have the board approve that moving forward, those teachers, those staff members that make our district what it is, they're going to have a voice in how these things are going to happen. So that is very layered in terms of our approach in listening to the experts who are in the classrooms, who are on the buses, who are in the cafeteria, to make sure that we are doing right by our students and our staff and our families. The American Academy of Pediatrics came out, and a lot of people ultimately said, they said kids need to be back in school. But when you flip through the report, in many school settings, 6 feet between students is not feasible. And we agree with that. Evidence suggests that spacing that's close to 3 feet apart may benefit with 6 feet if students are wearing face coverings. And I think that's an important indication, because they are saying you need to do these things. Putting 31 students in a classroom, and we'll show what that picture looks like, does not achieve what the American Academy of Pediatrics is saying in terms of trying to create that distance. So I think that's important. And again, it singles out secondary schools, and I just mentioned how that works with secondary schools. It's very challenging to do that. Desks should be placed 3 to 6 feet apart when feasible. And the only way we can do that is reducing the number of students that are attending. 6 feet at the secondary level would mean students would be attending every third day. So we're being flexible following these guidelines and really trying to get between that 3 to 6 feet apart. There was some conversations about a draft from the CDC, a task force that came out. So it was released to the media. The media released it on July 8th. And I think it's important from the CDC. It talks about the risk of spread. And it said low risk students and teachers engage in virtual only classes, activities, and events. And we lived with that in March, since March 16th. That's how long ago that has been since we lived in that world. And we began with we want students to be back. We know there's a detriment to our students when they're not attending. So the low risk, obviously, we have to weigh that. More risk, small in-person classes, activities, and events. Groups of students stay together with the same teacher throughout the school day. Groups do not mix. That is exactly what we're doing in K through 6. We're encapsulating those students. Students remain at least 6 feet apart, don't share objects. And even at the high school and junior high, by reducing the number of students there, we are not necessarily keeping the students together every single day in that encapsulated pod, but we're better able to have that closer to that 6 feet social distancing, which is important. And then the highest risk is full-size in-person classes and activities. Students are not spaced apart, and they share things, and they mix between classes and activities. So again, the reason I wanted to take a little bit of time, because we have reviewed journal articles and reports literally from around the world. And I know we've looked at, plans not only from the 610 other school districts in Ohio, many of those, but also from across the country and across the nation, and looked at what other countries have done. And at the end of the day, we have to make a decision what's best for Perrysburg. And I think that's really important. And I think our plan reflects that. So increasing cases of COVID could lead to school disruption. And I mentioned that. And again, if you're watching and you're saying, well, Mr. Hostler, having my junior high 7th grader attend school only 2 days out of the 5 is very disruptive to me as a parent. I understand that. I was a father of a student who graduated last year, which had a devastating impact, what happened at the end of last school year. And I also have children in college, and I understood what that did to their academic programming there too. So I understand this, but let's just talk about what happens if we ignore all of those recommendations and just throw everyone together. So July 7th, Governor DeWine said we are in a much more dangerous time. Look at Florida and Texas. We don't want to go there. So this was his message over a week ago. And while that message was being put out there, the Ohio State University has come out with their guidelines, and they're looking at a blended approach. And if you have a child that's going to the Ohio State University, you get your schedule, and some of the classes are all online, some are blended, some are reduced. All those things are happening at campuses across. Classes with more than 100 people are going to be virtually or blended. Social distancing, at least 6 feet in public spaces, face masks worn indoors. So I could have polled Kent State, Cincinnati, any university in Ohio, and you're going to see the similar approach. This is actually from their recommendations, and what does it show? A reduced number of seats in every classroom. So and creating space for the teacher, the instructor. So this is what's happening in the university. So our plan, our hybrid plan, is exactly what is happening if you have children returning to college in the fall. As a parent, am I excited about the fact that my children are going to campus and maybe living in a dorm and online for the majority of their day? I scratch my head at that. But what I'm trying to point out is changes are happening in instructional settings. And there's a reason for that. So places of worship in our communities, depending on where you move, from restaurants to shops to stores, places of worship, what we're experiencing when we go into these areas has changed. And what do you notice in the place where I worship? It's the same thing. Every other pew, families may sit close together, but there's significant distance from other worshipers. And that's what we're proposing in our plan too. That's what you're seeing the day that you go into worship. So it's really no different than what we're experiencing in other important areas of our life. The Ivy League, so if you're a Princeton fan, you're not going to win the National Football Championship if the football season happens. So you'll be disappointed again. But they have eliminated college football and fall sports. The Big Ten announced that they are saying, no out of conference games at this time. They're not willing to play MAC schools in Ohio at this time. And just think about that. Forget traveling to, out of state. The Ohio State University is saying it's too risky for us to play Kent State, Akron, Bowling Green, Cincinnati. And with the resources that they have available, I think it's important to take a look at, what's happening around us. July 15th, in Illinois, 36 students from Zurich High School sports camp tested positive. And I know people are saying, well, that's another state. But again, this idea that somehow students are immune from getting it and spreading it, it is clearly they are less of a chance the younger you are of contracting it and spreading it. So our hybrid plan reflects that. But to say that this is something that, if you're 18 and under, you don't get it and you don't get sick from it, is not accurate, because it is happening. July 9th, we went from orange to red. And that's an important distinction for our area. In the last update, there are more active COVID cases in Perrysburg, in our zip code, than in Bowling Green. So I know there's some people that say, well, this community or that community is driving this. And I think yesterday at the governor's press conference, they did a really nice job, the physician there, talking about how they measure it and how they take into account that. The decision tree from the CDC, when there is a positive, if you have a confirmed case in a building, assess the risk, and they're recommending a short potential 2 to 5 day dismissal. Our plan, we'll talk a little bit more about that in the next couple of meetings. What happens if, and not if, but what happens when. And, obviously we're working very closely with the Wood County Health Department to follow a decision tree that is not as disruptive and certainly keeps everyone safe. And I think that's important. So what impact will cases have on schools? And I think as we begin to do this, I think we need to clear out something, because I'm guilty of this frequently, where I interchange things like, oh, that person was diagnosed and they're under quarantine. So often I will use these interchangeably, and I know many people do as well. But I think we have to become clear on what these words mean, because as we return to school and these things start to happen, we kind of have to have the right terminology so we understand. So isolation is when a person is sick who's been diagnosed, in this case, with COVID. They're not under quarantine, they're in isolation. And that is, there's a whole different sequence for them. People who are quarantined have been exposed to someone with a confirmed COVID diagnosis, and then you're quarantined. So if you're in isolation, according to local health department, the steps you have to take is people who have not been tested, who are suspected positive, should stay at home for 3 days, or stay at home, and at least 3 days after showing no symptoms have passed, no fever reducing drugs, and 10 days since the initial symptoms. And we understand, and then of course with people who have a lab confirmed test, it's basically very similar. So we know that there's issues with access to testing in a quick way, where to get a test. And we're hearing about people saying, I can't get a test till 4 days from now. And then we're also hearing that it's taking multiple days to get back. So part of what makes it really challenging for us is the lag of time between getting the test and getting the results. But this, if you are suspected positive or you are lab confirmed, these are the steps that they're recommending to you. If you've been exposed to someone who is positive, confirmed positive by a lab test, you're required to quarantine 14 days. And that's where that works. So I think it's important as we begin to talk about, well, what is the impact on schools and what has to happen? We will have another complete presentation walking through what happens when these things happen, because I know there's lots of questions in the community and with board members, and we want to get to the reasons why we're making the recommendation. The how, I mentioned, we need staff involved. The staff has been involved in lengthy conversations with the Department of Health, with our school head nurse, talking about this tracing that we have to do and what we have to do. So I just want to get the terms correct. So I just mentioned the word tracing, and with the tracing that happens, we have to begin to change basically everything that we do. So who is at a bus stop on any particular day, we're going to have to know that. We're going to have assigned seating on the buses because in who's attending. And right now we're looking at a system where students will swipe their card when they get on the bus, so that we have a record of what students were on that bus on what day. We need to have assigned seating in the classrooms. We have to take attendance, which we do anyway, of who is in on those particular days. If there's a class meeting, if there's an event, we need to keep a log of who's at practice, who is participating in any of those school time activities. We also have to keep a log of those interactions between staff and students that are significant, not passing in the hallway, but sitting down with a student in an enclosed environment for more than 10 minutes. We're going to have to begin to monitor all of these things, because as people begin to suspect that they have it or report to us that they're positive, we need to be going with the health department back and looking at those things, and to begin to notify families that they have been, a child has been, or a staff member has possibly been exposed to somebody who might be suspected positive or confirmed positive and now must quarantine. So our work in tracing, tracking, doing these things, communicating between the schools and the health department. My understanding is we're going to have to collect this data, give it to the health department. They're going to make an assessment and say, okay, these students are the ones that need to be tested, or quarantined based on this staff member being positive or based on a fellow student. It is going to take on daily work doing this. So again, I just kind of highlighted these things. We work with the health department. We begin to notify families that there is suspected exposure. We have to begin to plan, because if a student comes back and says, I'm going to quarantine for 14 days, we have to begin to make plans instructionally how we can support that student. And that remote Monday, why is every Monday off? When we begin to have students pop out like popcorn, in this class, these students, in this class, maybe this whole classroom, all these different situations are going to be occurring every week. And we're going to need to make sure that we have the ability to connect with those students during that period off so that they can maintain their education at a high standard and then be able to return to school. Those families that are saying, I don't want to start the year in this environment, we will have staff members coordinating with them, and they will be given an entirely remote program with its own unique curriculum. And so that's part of the what and the how that we'll be explaining to parents. But I don't want parents to say, well, what happens to my child? Do I have to leave Perrysburg schools? And the answer to that is, of course not. You're our students. We're coming up with multiple solutions that are available depending on your situation. And at the end of the day, if you want to homeschool or go to a different environment, we respect that right as well. So for those folks that are saying 5 days a week, bring all the students in, there is less, the students are not going to get it. They're not going to spread it. So let's just talk about Perrysburg High School. And in 1 week, what happens if 5 students test positive? They all must be isolated, and we get confirmed labs that yes, these 5 students, unrelated to each other, are positive. And let's say they're in 6 different classes. So just like I described, French and Spanish and geometry, all spread out over the building. And the health department looks at having, and I'm I'll have some teachers saying, I'd love to have a class with 26 students. So because we usually have more in many of our core, I recognize that. But just for this exercise, 26 other students in those classes, and the health department says, you did not do any social distancing. You put all these kids together. All of them are going to have to be quarantined now. That would be 780 students. And this doesn't even include buses or the cafeteria. That's 46% of our students quarantined for the next 2 weeks. That is a significant disruption to 46% of our families, to their learning process. And that is what we're trying to avoid. And I think that is something that is going to be a challenge. So if we have only 50% of the students present, same scenario, everything's laid out here. And instead of 780 students, we're talking about 390. That's a lot. And that is disruptive. But I would argue that we are still able to better maintain the education in a least disruptive way. The schedule can still continue for the majority of our students at the high school. So for folks who are saying, well, if 2 days are good enough, then 5 days are good enough, I think that misses the point. And the point is this: we're just like the picture of the place of worship, the church. You can pack them in, but again, it's that social distancing. So if something does happen, it is impacting fewer students and fewer families. And that's a big part of our goal with that. So, and I wrote this and we'd have to update this, but people are saying, you know, you're trying to scare us. We're not going to have 5 students at Perrysburg High School. You know, school age children do not get it. They do not pass it. So this week we have 3 student athletes that have been quarantined after an exposure. And those 3 are presumptive or suspected positives, and we're waiting results. 2 are connected to the same exposure and another one is not. And we've notified families already of this situation. And the football team is, I know it's been in social media, but the football team has taken steps before any of this happened to limit the number of students, athletes that are in any setting. So instead of having the whole team working out and practicing, all of our sports have broken up into smaller groups, much like what we're proposing in our model with the secondary folks. So several students who are non-athletes have also been, you know, notified and are in this situation that we're not even aware of because they're not back to school. We had 2 central office staff members that are quarantined after exposure to confirmed. And I would have to update this in this short period of time. That has also been expanded to 3 custodians and a building secretary. This is just in this week. So for those that are saying, you know, boy, this is really an extreme measure. It is, as the governor has talked about, this is out there, it is spreading, and it's getting to students. And I know people are saying, well, they don't get it as badly, but they're getting it and they're passing it. And that is a concern to those families. It's a concern to our staff. It's a concern to the community. So again, this slide, at the end of the day, we'd probably have to update it because that's what's happening right now. I mean, we are getting text messages in the evening saying, hey, just wanted you to know, here's what's happening. And in June, in May, in April, this was not happening. And it's happening now. Almost every other hour, we're getting an update, something else. So again, it's not, you're trying to scare us, and you plan for the worst, Mr. Hostler, and and we want to plan for that this is not going to happen. I think we're trying to be reflective of what's taking place, and when Mr. Beatty joins us here shortly, he can speak to what he's seeing as well. So what is our responsibility? What is the board's responsibility to follow those guidelines, those recommendations? And I think that's an important question, given where we are, as a community and our role in the community, because certainly, we have a responsibility to sit down with the health department, which we do almost on a daily basis now, to talk about what's happening. And we've shared the plans. We've talked to them about what we're thinking in terms of starting school. So this has been an ongoing dialogue the whole summer. So we haven't arrived at this plan in isolation, but we've consulted every step of the way with the health department, saying, here's what we're thinking, and we really appreciate their guidance. Other counties, again, this whole process, the guidelines, has really been pushed down to a very local level, and there's good and bad with that. So one of the things that are going to happen is some counties are reacting to these school plans as almost an advisory role. Let's sit down, let's talk about it. I like this, I don't like that. If you do that, you're risking this, but ultimately it's your decision. And there's not a box they're checking and they're not signing off. And then in some counties, I'm hearing from colleagues that that's what they're doing. Submit the plan, we review it, we sign off on it, we check the box. So that is going to differ. There's 88 counties in Ohio, and everyone is handling a little bit different. At any given time, the local health department may come in and say, listen, there's something happening here and we need to shut you down for 3 weeks and restart. Everyone needs to get away. That could happen at any given time, depending on what's happening in the community. I believe, in terms of casualty insurance, and we have many families that understand insurance, and you need to follow the rules of the law when you're driving. And if you're reckless and you have a lot of incidents, the insurance company says, you're taking a lot of risk, and we're going to charge you a little bit more because you're being a risky driver or you're making decisions that aren't great. If you're a business owner, if you're in the medical field, that you have to follow best practices so that if there is a claim, if there is an event, the insurance company can look back and say, you are making a good faith effort to follow the best practices. We can better defend you in that case. And I'm not pointing this out because we're afraid of a lawsuit. I'm not pointing this out because we're, we're doing whatever the insurance company tells us to do. What I am saying is that the board has a responsibility to safeguard taxpayer dollars. We need to make a good faith effort to make sure that we're not putting the district in a position that they could be exposed to something because they're choosing to ignore. And this board has never advocated to totally ignoring guidelines and recommendations. But I have heard districts who have taken a very strong position, who are now having conversations with their insurance carrier saying, if you come out and you say you are not doing these things and you're putting it in writing, we need to talk about that. And so, again, I'm just making it a point that is something that we considered. We called our insurance carrier. We talked about our plan with them. So again, we didn't just sit down and come up with this, but talking to the building leadership teams through our principals, health department, consulting with dozens and dozens of other school districts, listening to their health commissioners or directors from other counties, talking to many, many folks is how we developed this plan. Pointing this out again, because these guides that a lot of people like to reference are saying, that social distancing is something that you have to pay attention to. So again, we want students to return to school every day, and I think that this plan reflects what's happening in the community and the conditions that are happening in the community. When there is increased and very high exposure and spread, and that's what is described in levels 2 and 3, the plan adjusts accordingly. The plan reduces classroom, hallway traffic, cafeteria capacity at the secondary level by 50%. And again, the reason why is we want to reduce that potential for disruption for student learning. And we have a role in stopping the spread in our communities. Bringing 100% of the students back in our setting with little to no social distancing doesn't really follow any of those recommendations. And I think that's important. Now, there are some other districts across the state that are able to bring in all of their students 5 days a week. And that's fine. And I know this week, one local school district, Ottawa Hills, for example, is able to do that. And their plan is unique. And they were creative in what they had to do, but so are we. But the difference is their school district does not have busing, does not have a lunch plan. And their K-12 enrollment could fit inside our junior high. So, you have more space in some of those smaller school districts. And when the health department reviews those plans, they may be able to do it because of the small numbers of students that are attending those districts. So I think we have to be careful in saying, well, District X is doing this, why can't we do that? We've talked to District X in most scenarios. We've reviewed their plan in most scenarios. And we have to come up with a plan for Perrysburg. And we certainly look and study to try to maximize, again, the very first slide, we want students to be back in school. But we also have to respect what this disease is, what this virus is doing. And, every plan for every school district is going to be a little bit different. And I can tell you, sitting in the room with dozens and dozens of superintendents or on Zooms and listening to those conversations from across the state, they are looking out for their students. They're trying to make the best of their situation. And there's going to be some subtle differences, and it's not right or it's not wrong, but it's what's best for that school district and that community. So I think it's really important to keep that in mind as we look at our plan and we compare it to other school districts' plans. There isn't a better plan. There's things that we can certainly learn from. And the plan that we're presenting today, once we get into the school year, it may have to change because of what's happening, maybe for the better. And we would be so excited for that. We want that. As a parent of a student who lost so much as a senior, I know the isolation, the frustration, and the loss. I get that. And we wouldn't be making this recommendation if it wasn't completely necessary. Because again, we lived it as personally, and I don't like to talk about my personal experiences, but I think it's important that people understand that, that we get it, and we don't take this lightly, and we understand the implications of this. The other thing that reduced disruption is important. And people have said that Monday, why do we have to have that Monday off? And if you're a classroom teacher, and we talked about what a great job they did stepping up and making that transition. But we also understand during that time period that there were things that we learned about the online experience and having to pivot, on a dime. On March 16th, we went from face-to-face to online like that, with very little training, without any major support. It just happened. But we know moving forward that remote learning is going to be part of what we have to do. And we have to get better at making sure that students are getting, are accountable, that staff is accountable for doing the right things. And we need to make sure that online experience is as rigorous as we can get it. And that is vital to what we do. So if you're a classroom teacher and you're teaching every single day, 5 days a week with all of your students, how are you going to find the time to support that online instruction? How are you going to find the time to do that? And so our teachers are faced with this possibility coming into the school year, beginning with face-to-face and remote learning, if the board follows the recommendation and supports that. We also have the risk of all of a sudden on a dime going to full remote like we did back in March. And I mentioned popcorn. In the classroom, popcorn is going to be popping. Kids are going to be, I'm 14 days quarantine, I'm isolating. Staff is going to have to be responding to that. So they're going to have in their windshield the students that are in class in front of them every day. And then they're going to have the students that are at home for 14 days or longer who are coming back, and they're going to have to be juggling that. And then further down the windshield looking out is this possible risk that at some point in time, they're going to be having to be prepared to switch to full remote if things heat up again and get worse. And so where do we find the ability to give the teachers the space to be able to plan and to handle that? And that remote day becomes something that is really important to quality instruction. For a parent, it's disruptive. I understand that. But we also heard from parents that, boy, teachers did a great job in making that adjustment. But if we come back, we better make sure that things are a little bit different too. And we're hearing that. And our plan is trying to address that. And so that's a challenge. And again, I just want to put an asterisk with this. Full remote, students who are beginning the year, we will have staff working with families to deliver a unique online curriculum just for those students. So that is always an option. So classroom teachers will be managing these three, and then we will have staff that'll be coordinating that number 4. Because again, teachers are looking at those 3 doors every single day, the potential of those 3 doors. And 2 of them will be opening and closing. And we hope to keep the one closed. We hope to keep all of them closed. But we have to build our system to be as good as it can be. And having the time to do that is essential. Some people may say, well, you had the whole summer. Well, we didn't, because we were under lockdown and we couldn't have more than 10 people in any setting until July. So it's only been just a little over 2 weeks since we've gotten the green light to even talk about planning for the school year. So those Mondays are going to be critical to our success in planning across the district. And I just talked a little bit about the importance of those Mondays. And again, if we move off of this and there is a vaccine, then we're back 5 days a week and we're running as normal, and we will celebrate that day, all of us. So again, 2 days a week is safe, then so is 5. And we've really talked about this, is really missing the point where we're talking about trying to reduce that spread to keep more students out of that popcorn scenario and keeping them in their classes in a somewhat normal, planned, scheduled situation. And we understand that the plan that we're proposing does not eliminate risk. And we want to be clear about that. It does not eliminate risk. We feel it reduces risk, and it allows our organization to continue to operate at the highest level we think it can. Our plan focuses on the importance of face-to-face instruction with younger students, where we understand the transmission is less likely and less prevalent. And with older students who are more independent, who have one-to-one and are used to a learning platform, where we are seeing now active spread among those students, I think our plan hits that balance. Again, for those that are out there saying 30 kids every day, this is a classroom, Perrysburg High School. And we're looking at that and we're saying, yeah, I'm good with that. 17, 18-year-olds in that setting, 7 hours a day, 5 days a week, let it roll. And when you go, and I know there's been some other governors that have talked about, well, if Home Depot can pull it off, then schools can pull it off. Well, I've been in those situations, in those stores. I have not seen that scenario where people are that stacked up because they have to be. And I think that's important. This is a typical lunch day. Perrysburg High School, 8 to 10 in a table. You know, so the folks that are out there saying 5 days a week, let it roll, that's not happening anywhere in the country right now. And you can say, well, you know what, Tom, figure out a way to social distance. That's just one of multiple lunchrooms. So where are we going to set these kids up in that building? How long will lunch take to get through if we're doing that? Well, you can have kids go outside, well, until it's raining, until it's cold. So there's some real challenges with that mindset of just throw everyone back together and it's going to be there. Even at the junior high level, this is a snapshot of what lunches look like. And even with the reduced number of students, we're looking at multiple, auxiliary gym is going to be a site for a lunch, and we're going to have lunch here. So it's going to change how we're serving lunch and how we're delivering lunch. And those things have to change. So finding the right balance, are we happy with this plan? And the answer is no. Again, as a parent, I want my child in school 5 days a week getting the full experience. But if I'm paying tuition, which I am as a parent, I'm not getting that in college. And as someone who goes to church most Sundays, I'm not getting that in my place of worship. So the expectation that schools are somehow magically going to be able to just be this place where all of this can happen is a real challenge. And I know we're prioritizing face-to-face learning, and we have to have a plan that's flexible. And I know, and this is my opinion, but we didn't do ourselves as a favor in this state we figured out, again, March 12th, the governor said we're shutting schools down on March 16th. 108 days passed before we got our guidelines on July 2nd. It took that long to figure out the guidelines, how to open schools. They figured out how to open everything else except for schools. And the reason is because it is so complicated, because it is so challenging, because there's so many factors that you have to consider. It was one of the last things that they came out with. First thing closed, one of the first things closed, the last thing that they were able to figure out, this is the guidelines that we're going to have to implement. So it is complicated. It is not easy. And that flexibility has to be there, because as we get into the year, we know we're going to have to make adjustments and changes. And we do. And so we didn't do ourselves any favors. We figured out how to open up Little League baseball long before we figured out how to open up a school. And that sent a terrible message to parents, because you have, and I'm not picking on Little League, but you have Little League practices and things that are happening. Parents are traveling with their kids to different venues, and it feels like things are back to normal. And now the reality and the complexity of opening up schools is beginning to set in. And people are saying, well, wait a minute, it was okay for me to have Little League, and now you're telling me you got to change the bus routes and my child's going to have to walk to school when they were bused last year, or all these things are, and the answer is yes. We didn't do ourselves any good with that. And we're trying to balance that too. And so it's an impossible no-win situation for educators who are trying to plan, and certainly for a board, a decision maker. It is an entirely no-win situation for all of you. And at the end of the day, no one is going to be happy, but we have to do what's best for students, and we have to be able to adapt to the information that we have. So finding the right balance is our goal. Opening them back up with little or no precautions is going to undermine the places of worship, the stores, or the restaurants, everyone who's been working so hard to keep this down. If we just open up and do business as usual, throw 31 kids in a classroom, we are now undermining, and I suspect that the health department would have something to say about that. So each day we need to evaluate student, employee, community health. This is a start of the plan. This is just the start. We don't want it to be the end plan. It is not our permanent plan. It is just the start. And again, we're taking this virus very seriously, and we need to be able to respond as much as we can. We want to move away from this as soon as possible. And this isn't the world that we want to live in. But right now, it's the world that we have to begin living in as a school community. We understand the burden that this places. And like I said, as a parent of a senior who graduated and seeing what they lost, no prom, spring sport athlete, defending champion in an event and track, possible college interest in competing in that event, the musicals, the plays, the final concerts, the awards programs, the decision day, wearing your t-shirt, the military signing day, all of these things gone. It was tragic. So we, knowing that, feeling that, experiencing that, it is with a heavy heart that we're saying we have to take these steps because they're necessary. They're certainly not easy. It's been over 100 years since we've seen a crisis like this, and we didn't choose this for us. You know, you are your child's teacher, and you send your child to our school for a good reason. And we want to keep that bond and that commitment to our families, that we're going to do our absolute best, and we're committed to doing that. And we won't rest until we do. We respect the job that all of our teachers and staff members have done. And this is about how we got here and the why. But I have to tell you that we're asking our staff to take a huge step by doing this plan. And I've talked to teachers, I've read their emails. We've had 3 teachers resign this week saying, I just can't. So we're asking our staff to step up in a way. And I've had folks say, well, they're first line responders. Well, they are. They train for what would happen if there is a shooter in school. They train for all these different scenarios. teachers, bus drivers, custodians, kitchen staff are willing and have in many situations put their lives out there and have taken heroic measures to protect students' lives. But having PPE and gowns and gloves and masks and all the things that are available to frontline fighters that we see exhausted, that's not what we're prepared to do. We're now acquiring all those things that we gave away to help those folks. We're now asking for them back. So we're asking our staff, and it's not just Perrysburg, but all school districts to jump into this gap significantly. So they're coming to the table as well. And I think we need to make sure that we send our appreciation and we're committed. Again, their voice is going to be critical in the weeks ahead, telling us how we can help them. And we need to continue to listen to our parents, continue to listen to the community, our staff, all of these stakeholders, and we want to make some adjustments. The conversations that we were having some time ago about the hybrid plan has changed. So during the development, when Assistant Superintendent Price presented, from what we shared with individual board members to what was presented, evolved. And this plan has since evolved from that presentation. We are listening. The survey that we conducted was one of the few that had an open-ended question, open-ended responses. We read those responses. We heard what parents had to say. And again, this is changing so rapidly that the survey results from June that we did today might look very different because this virus looks very different in our communities and in our school. So with that, I don't know if Ben has joined us. I know this was the window, so I'm not sure if he is
He's all set,
on the line.
Hustler. He is here. Welcome,
yeah.
Ben.
So maybe Ben, if you want to jump in a little bit and welcome. Thank you for taking the time. I know you're very busy and have to jump off shortly. So
yeah, not a problem. Tom and I have talked. I mean, we've talked pretty regularly. He's probably one of the superintendents I've talked with the most. I recognize the challenges that you all face. Just the sheer size of your schools create some logistical hurdles that other schools maybe don't have at the same time. And so that's one of the biggest things that we've seen with this virus is the more people congregated together, the quicker it spreads, and the quicker we get outbreaks that we have to track down. I've seen it happen just in a general residence of somebody has a large gathering for a family party, a birthday party, and you get people together in a house, and then all of a sudden we're tracking multiple cases and multiple contacts that we then have to quarantine individuals for 2 weeks at a time. And so when Tom and I talked and we looked at those pictures that he just showed, honestly, these days that makes me cringe. I look at a picture of that and something that would have been in the past a point of pride of just having the community together, having these students together for the socialization aspects that we want them to have. It turns into a public health nightmare on my end. I look at one of those pictures and any one of those could be the day that the outbreak happens within the school that then we're saying, hey, everybody that was within that cafeteria now needs to quarantine for 14 days. And that's how, in my mind, very quickly, a school could have to go fully remote. Not because the health department's telling you to go fully remote, just honestly because if you get enough staff and teachers that are quarantined, you're not going to have the staff to bring the students into the buildings. Everyone's going to have to be doing it this way. And so when Tom and I talked, I think we felt that your best shot on the front end of this is to sort of split the difference. Go with that hybrid plan, because starting with all in would be a huge challenge to stay open for any extended period of time and not have one or two cases sort of get large groups of people quarantined to the point that within a couple weeks, you'd then the only alternative would be to go fully remote. I think it gives you a shot, at least to kind of see how the school year is going to go. As Tom said, de-densifying the population is probably the best bet at this point, and that still doesn't get you 6 feet of distance between every student that we would want. But we're comfortable with 4 feet of distance or something better than just being very close. When we start to look at, from the health department's perspective, what potentially can happen with one positive case, we're going to have to walk through that student's day for the period of time that they were symptomatic or 2 days prior to being symptomatic and say, who do they sit around? And anyone that sits within 6 feet of them for greater than 15 minutes, which during a school day is definitely going to be greater than 15 minutes, all of those kids are going to have to be flagged and say, now you need to be home for 2 weeks. And you can see how quickly just a one or two cases could really start to disrupt whole classrooms. And as much as I agree with Tom, I'm a parent. As much as we want kids fully back in, I want to get to that point. And my hope is we try this method and we see how it works. And if everything's going great, there could become a point a few months down the road that we go, okay, now we can start to do more things. We can start to have more events and bring more students together because we've proven, let's say that the masks work. If students are wearing their face coverings, we're not seeing outbreaks within the school. So we can start to bring more students together. But I would rather do that in baby steps to work back to that point than try to go all in on the front end and desperately fail and say within a couple weeks, well, we've proven that we can't do it, and so now we're just fully going remote for a period of time. So with that, I want to be responsive to your questions, and that's sort of why I wanted to be here this morning. And so, Tom, is there anything else for you to add, or I'm happy to field any questions that anyone may have.
No, thank you. I'll turn it over to the board, and I know you need to jump off, so thank you for taking your time. I know we're one of many areas that you're worried about today, so I appreciate you taking the time, and we'll open it up to board members. And if there's anything directed I know there were some questions about the level plan and linking R. I don't know if maybe you want to mention that. I know the
I can
government
speak.
press conference addressed that.
Yeah, I've had different schools kind of ask about that and say, is the health department going to come out, and if we hit a level 4, are they going to close us down? I would tell you that most likely, if we were at a level 4, that's going to indicate that there's some hospital indicators that we're hitting where people are being hospitalized and we're starting to have to worry about the healthcare system. I would think the health department's recommendation would be to go to remote. At that point. I don't know that the health department's going to force any school to do it. I just think, again, as Tom talked, every school community impacts our numbers in Wood County, and all of those numbers count towards our indicators. And so I would hate to see, us get to a point where the recommendation at a level 4 is essentially only go out for essential services, stay at home, only go out if you absolutely have to. And if we've created a system where schools can be remote at periods of time, I think, if we're saying, hey, everyone should stay home as much as possible, we wouldn't want to see the school community driving further outbreaks that are then going to start to impact businesses. Because if we stayed at level 4 for any extended period of time and we start to see hospitalizations going up and the hospitals potentially be impacted, at some point we're going to have to make a decision and say, okay, what does this look like for us? Do we have to have restaurants close down again and go back to just being carry out only? Do bars have to close down? Do theaters have to close down? And I don't know how the business community would respond if they're going, hey, our businesses are being impacted, but you're still fully in school, potentially driving these outbreaks. I think we all have to work together on these things. The other aspect that I get asked a lot of questions on is zip code data versus county as a whole. And I can tell you what we've seen. No one zip code is immune to this virus. We're all interconnected. Honestly, Perrysburg gets impacted more by Lucas County than it necessarily does by other factors in Wood County, in Bowling Green. But how many, we have so many parents that probably live in Perrysburg, but work in Lucas County or work in Bowling Green. And so trying to carve out and just say, well, we're going to base our decisions based on activity levels and active cases in just the Perrysburg zip code doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense to me, because you have people traveling from all over. And so I think we need to be responsive and not only kind of watch our own countywide numbers, also keep an eye on Lucas County as well, because what I have seen is every time Lucas County's numbers go up, Perrysburg's numbers go up. So we were at a point where a couple of weeks ago, Perrysburg's numbers were low, Bowling Green was going up. That now has subsequently flipped, and Perrysburg is higher in active cases than Bowling Green right now. And I believe it's directly connected to Lucas County's numbers going up. And if you saw, Lucas County just this week was elevated to level 3 as well. And so I think these are all factors that we need to have regular conversations on to make decisions on what's the best practice for the school, and not tie just to one data point. We have to look at all the data points. Questions from anyone?
Dr. Beatty, thank you for joining us. One thing I've been watching with a lot of interest is what's going on down in Athens County, Ohio. Kind of they're on the precipice of going purple, I guess. Knowing that one of the great things about living in Northwest Ohio is all the universities that are near us, University of Toledo, your future employer, Bowling Green. Congrats on that, by the way.
Thank you.
How should we be looking at these universities opening up in the next, say, 3 to 4 weeks, and what that potential impact could be on our school system?
Yeah, absolutely. The university takes that very seriously. So they're laying out a plan, much like you guys are, and their plan's probably even more restrictive than your guys', than the school plan that's been laid out, just because they are fully going 6 feet of distance in all classrooms and all spaces across campus. They're working to navigate so that every single individual on campus can maintain 6 feet of distance, will have to wear a face covering at all times on campus, except when they're basically alone, in a private setting. And so from the school life aspect, I think that they're going to navigate that pretty well. As we all know, the challenge for a university is the majority of their students actually live off campus. So these are adults that live in the community, whether they live in Bowling Green or whether they commute from Perrysburg or Toledo and drive and live with their parents, or maybe live, on their own. And it's very difficult when we know that the college kids like to go to the bars and they like to congregate, and the university doesn't have a lot of control over that. They're working with them to really do some education around those things. And honestly, I think the face covering mandates help us drastically. So, the mandate that was passed in Bowling Green, I think part of that was in direct relation to knowing that, hey, these students are going to be out and about within the community and maybe not socially distancing, but if we can, sort of require everyone to wear a face covering, we're hopeful that that'll be helpful. I know Toledo is doing the same thing. And so obviously I'm sure a lot of them travel up to downtown Toledo to spend time, much like, even younger people who are a little bit older. So, we've seen cases in anyone under 30. Generally, we've seen some of these outbreaks that have happened as well. So these are all things that are being looked at from the university's perspective, because they recognize, much like I just talked with your community, that their community is going to drive numbers and is going to drive impacts within the Wood County as a whole and Northwest Ohio as a whole. And so that's where I would look to say, we probably need to look at that. But if there's outbreaks going on in Bowling Green, Perrysburg is not that far away. That, I think we see these numbers go up. If they start to go up in one area, we generally see people who are connected, and then we see the numbers go up in another area as well.
Thank you.
Yep.
You speak a little bit more, Ben. Thank you for being here. Speak a little bit more about the mask and the sign science behind that? Because you certainly see all the different opinions about masks, and I know that some family members will probably ask about the masks.
Yeah, absolutely. So we know that that's one of our greatest tools in slowing down the spread of this virus. Now, it's not foolproof. You know, they're not N95 masks that give you, you know, such a level of protection that we have healthcare workers, you know, directly walking into rooms with patients with all sorts of infectious diseases and staying safe. But they're a level that is beneficial. You know, I've seen studies that have shown, and this might be something for, especially for your teachers, or if you have, if you have any staff that is at risk, if you put on a cloth face covering and a face shield at the same time, it almost gives you the same level of protection as a N95 medical respirator mask. And so when we start to look at the purpose of the mask, as we all can imagine, how quickly can this virus spread if somebody is actively, coughing within a room with close contacts? You know, I'm now projecting that virus across the room, and we've seen that this even happens with talking as well. Is not as far as if I cough or I sneeze, but I am projecting that virus out into the environment. And so when I'm wearing that face covering, it's keeping those viral particles right close to me within my own small airspace versus projecting out into the larger airspace. So when you have a room full of individuals, if everyone's wearing that face covering, it drastically increases our odds that the viral spread is not going to happen in a quick, large scale. If it is going to happen, it's going to be in a much smaller, slower, confined environment. And that gives us better opportunities to catch those individuals, isolate them, and at the same time, not see outbreaks happen. And so that's the sort of the science behind why we think that just this one tool alone may have huge impacts for us. We've seen this be beneficial in other countries that have opened up and brought their schools back together, that just that one aspect of wearing that face covering can make a huge difference. We may find that, hey, we bring schools back together, and maybe if just the schools that do that masking component well can potentially get back to be fully in, as long as everyone's wearing a mask. We don't know yet, though, and so I think we want to start slow with those baby steps and see what that looks like.
Thank you.
Then I have two questions for you. The first one, I was asked by a parent just a few days ago, since level 2 is not a super charged increase, what is the logic between combining level 2 and 3 in our hybrid plan versus combining level 1 and 2 so that more kids could stay in school longer?
So I guess you're asking, so rather than focus on 1 and 2, focus on combining 2 and 3?
No, we are combining 2 and 3.
2 and
They
3.
were asking, can we combine 1 and 2
I
so
gotcha.
that there can be more kids in school longer before we set off the smoke alarms and reduce the amount of time they're in school?
Yeah, I think the idea behind it really comes down to those levels are going to fluctuate. And so I think you're really, I would hesitate to tie into the levels too much. What the levels tell us when we get these changes is basically activity level within the community. And so if the activity level is going up, we're going to move up in level. So if we're seeing more cases, and the sticking point where we really start to see, when one of the indicators is 50 cases, basically within the community per 100,000 people, because we know if we have 50 cases, 50 active cases can easily turn into a much higher number, because sometimes those cases exponentially increase based on level of spread and things. And so once we hit that threshold, that's where the concern comes into play. And so I think we want to be proactive. We don't want to get to a point where we're saying, okay, and that's the whole point of the advisory system to begin with. We're at a level 3 right now, which seems like, that's a pretty high alert. But the hospitals aren't, being impacted yet, and the ERs aren't being overrun with people coming in. As the governor talked this week, it really comes down to this virus can react very quickly. So to his point, Florida 4 weeks ago was exactly like Ohio is right now, with our numbers. They went from 1,000 cases a day to 15,000 cases a day, and then when you start to approach 1,000 deaths, at different times, this is a spot we don't want to go to. And so I think the plan that Tom laid out is trying to be more proactive on the front end, to not have to be reactive to say, oh, well, we didn't respond quickly enough, and now we have massive outbreaks and we need to shut down. I think as he put in there, your plan needs to be flexible. And I think you need to make that very clear to all your parents that this plan can change at any point throughout the year, and we need to adapt. And it could be in a positive fashion that we're able to bring, like maybe it is an adjustment to recognizing, okay, we tied ourselves to this level system, but now we do want to make that change that you're suggesting. But let's be conservative on the front end and see how things go and try to get it right so that there's some level of consistency for these students, and then increase more. Because I think it would be much harder for parents to go, we're going all in, and now 3 weeks in, we found it didn't work. Now you need to figure out your babysitting schedule and what your work schedule and everything like that in the midst of it. I would start as conservatively as possible to get them used to that, and then open things up a little bit more as you can, versus going the alternate way, if that makes sense.
Yes, so it's basically the plan for the worst, hope for the best scenario. Okay.
You got it. Yep.
All right, so then a question that I personally had is, as a former teacher, every year, as the fall comes in, you're going to hit flu season. How will we be able to discern, as we're all on hyperventilated alert on this, how are we going to be able to discern somebody who has just the flu versus COVID? Or are we going to treat flu cases the same way?
You can't. There's no way that you can. When you look at the list of symptoms, there's no way that you will be able to differentiate on the front end. Strep throat, somebody has a sore throat versus a common cold versus flu versus COVID, and especially in children, because their symptoms can be fairly mild to some extent, but then they can also still be actively spreading it. And so this year for us is going to be very difficult for schools, because kids are going to have to be out of school more than they ever have in the past. Because any given day, if a child wakes up and says, hey, mom, dad, I got a sore throat, I got a little cough going on, we need to take the time to assess that with that child, and we can't have them come into school that day. And so this is just something that parents are going to have to be ready for. And I think that's where the plan also helps with that, of if I know, these are the 2 days in school, but I know how to make it work when my child wakes up and has these symptoms, the remote option is right there for them. They're logging in this way today, and they're not falling behind. I think getting parents prepared for that, because I would hate to see the alternative that parents just start to go, well, I need you in school, so don't tell anybody that you got that sore throat and I'm dropping you off, right? I think we need to work together in these things, but parents are going to need a better relationship probably than they've ever had with their pediatrician or primary care provider, because they're going to have to be making phone calls to go, there's a difference of if my son or daughter wakes up with a sore throat today and it's kind of mild, and the next day they're fine, the pediatrician's probably going to go, yeah, they're okay to go back. But we want the medical provider to make that call. I don't necessarily want your teachers, or your front desk, front secretaries trying to make that call with parents. You're going to need to steer them towards their medical provider to make that call in, is this just allergies? And your student can be in the school. So we need every parent to recognize what is baseline normal health-wise for your kid and what's not. And anytime that we slightly think that it's not, they need to stay at home.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
I have a question. This is Kelly.
Hey, Kelly.
Hi. Was this system intended to be tied for schools? That's my understanding that it wasn't.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think the system was built to be intended for schools. I think all along it was meant to tell us trends, and then it was meant for local school districts and health departments and businesses to make decisions based on what the data is telling them. And so honestly, I think all it was meant to be was, here's what's going on within your county. And here's the profiles, here's the indicators that you're hitting. Locally, you need to make decisions of what's best for your community. And so I think that's sort of where I'm seeing the schools are tying it, because they're recognizing, hey, if the data is telling us this, we probably should be responsive to it and not necessarily just ignore it. And so I think that's why most of the superintendents that I've talked to are building some sort of component in that if the advisory system is telling us this, we need to be responsive for our families. And so that's, I don't know if the state ever came out and said, they haven't, and to that point, we haven't seen what happens when a county goes to level 4 or purple. I don't know if the governor will come out and say, well, if you're level 4, you got to have schools closed. He may not.
Yeah, well, and that's probably why I'm not in favor of it. When the governor gives you the decision to make a school board make a decision individually, locally, and then you in turn turn around and basically give it back and tie yourself to the system created by the Wood County, then the decision is not then based locally. So I think the county is too broad. And we shouldn't be influenced by, let's say, like a Bowling Green, where students are going to come back living in dorms, etc. And when I've looked at the data, rural counties are penalized because they have less people and less cases to start. So when you increase the 100,000 people, it makes it look so much bigger. Like when you go from a 2 to a 4, you've increased it by 50%, but the numbers were so small to begin with. So
Yeah.
I'm for using the information that you have provided, working with you, just like working with all the other organizations, getting all that, information, the CDC, the AAP, the Ohio Department of Education, and using that as a tool, but certainly not tying it to the color-coded system.
Yeah, and that's a decision.
And I
for you all.
know, right. And I know other schools are doing that.
Yeah, and that's what I've seen in other schools. I think it's at least the other superintendents I've talked to have sort of said, how can we as a county be on a level 4, the highest alert potentially, and still try to say, we're not going to try to help the county in turning this number around or locally turn this number around. As the governor talked, is we all need to do this to have some sense of normalcy and have businesses open and things along these lines. But again, that's always your local decision. The health department's going to be here to offer you our best advice on what we're seeing activity wise. A lot of your school choice is not going to be tied to the levels to some extent, in that it's going to be tied to activity that you're seeing directly in the schools. If you're having cases within your schools, there may be no cases going on in Bowling Green schools or North Baltimore schools. But if a portion of people are quarantined in Perrysburg schools, that may prompt you to have to close for a certain period of time just to sort of start fresh and reset the clock anyway. That may have nothing to do with the activity levels that, or advisory level of where we're set as a county. So I think having that flexibility makes sense to kind of watch what's going on within your own school, but also watching what's going on in the county as a whole. But that's your choice as to how you want to use that advisory system.
Great, thank you.
And Ben, and let me get this clear. So that's our choice, but on the other end, if we do have an outbreak, closing schools could be your choice or the CDC's choice. So I like the idea of what you're saying about the risk, the minimal risk, baby steps. And so recommendations from the professionals like yourselves, I really appreciate. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's it. Is I can tell you, we've not done this yet. We have not seen what this virus does in the fall. We have not seen what it does with, trying to get kids back together, congregated for 7 hours a day. And so I would rather go into this, and sort of try each day and see, okay, here's where we know we can control it. And let's try to build back up to a normal school year versus going all in and having to reduce back.
I have a couple questions. What is the trigger point for quarantine? I have 4 grandchildren, and over a typical school year, my daughter would call me probably 5 or 6 times to say, Johnny has a fever today, he's staying home. So just because Johnny has a fever today and he's staying home, does that set off the trigger of I'm going to have to, the school is going to have to quarantine everyone that sits around Johnny? What's the trigger point?
Yeah, so quarantine comes into play with an actual positive case or a probable case. So a positive case is somebody who went and got tested and tested, I have COVID-19. Probable case is I have the symptoms and I was directly exposed to a positive case. So if my wife tested positive and I never got tested, but I start to develop symptoms, I'm going to be deemed a probable case because of our close proximity and being close to her. For quarantine is when we're talking, there's an actual positive case within the school, and anyone who was within 6 feet of that individual for greater than 15 minutes now has to be quarantined because they could develop symptoms and be contagious anywhere over the next 14 days. So it doesn't have anything to do with I woke up today, or my kid woke up today and isn't feeling great. Doesn't necessarily get them quarantined. It makes us maybe want to investigate that further with working with that medical provider and letting them guide us. But if they would get tested at any point and would test positive, that's where we go into effect for contact tracing and quarantining individuals. So it's not just, hey, I had a little bit of a cold today and now I feel better tomorrow. That child probably can just come back to school once they're feeling better. But it's when we actually start to track this disease and actually find it is when things really go into play with quarantining groups of individuals. But you can imagine how difficult this would be with children, in that with somebody in a workplace, I can talk with them and I can go, hey, during this period of time, who are you around, for greater than 15 minutes within 6 feet? And an adult can usually easily say, well, I spent time with this person, and this person. I don't know. Our kids are probably going to go, well, I was around everyone in the classroom. And so if that's the case, then everyone in the classroom has to stay home for 2 weeks.
My second question, maybe it's for you and for Kelly, but if we don't use the map, the charts, the levels, what data point would you recommend we use to decide how we're going to structure?
I would recommend using it. Honestly, I don't know what other data points you would use. I think that the system is built in a way that it can tell us, it's giving us information that's showing our trends within the community. Are we trending upwards or downwards? I can tell you right now, we're trending downwards in Wood County. Our numbers over the last couple days are going down. The weekends always concern me because we seem to kind of spike up over the weekends when we come back on Monday, because people go out, they get out and about, they go see their friends and things. But if we continue to trend downwards, I see our level coming back down to orange, hopefully by next week. And so that's good for us as a community. We can look at that and we can say, hey, this is where we want to go. We want to get back down to level 1. And so let's keep doing what we're doing and let's work to get this down. It makes us feel safer when kids are potentially coming back. I don't want it to continue to trend upwards, because if we're at level 4 right before you guys are trying to have your first day of school, that's going to be we're already coming in at a loss to some extent. So if we can trend downwards, I think, that's something that we do want to take into account, but also looking at what's going on within the general community. And that'll be the other data points will be what's going on within your school systems. How many, do you have any cases once you get back and running? But we won't know that until we open up and bring some students in and monitor that. That's not a data point that we have yet because we haven't done it. And Kelly, you're more than welcome to respond as well. And guys, I have to hop off. I apologize. But I feel free. to reach out at any point. Tom and I are going to continue talking. So even though I am transitioning into a different role, the BGSU and the health department have formed a partnership, and I'm still going to be working on as a consultant on behalf of BGSU with the health department. And one of my specialties is going to actually be the schools. And so, I've worked with all the superintendents for the last 6 months. And so we're going to continue that relationship, and I'll be the representative from the health department that will still be probably working with all the superintendents even into the future, and sort of trying to coordinate this with the university as well, because there's a recognition from BGSU that we're all in this together. And when we talk about education, it's important for everybody, and we should all be working to find the best practices to make sure that all of our students and our families navigate this as best as we can. So thank you all.
Oh, yeah, thank you,
Great,
Ben.
thank you.
Thank you for the dedication that you've provided and the leadership you've provided. We've been really blessed to have you, leading us in this charge. So just thank you so much.
Yep. Thanks all. Good luck.
Yep, thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank
You
you.
too.
Thank you.
And if I could, Gretchen, answer your question, since it was directed toward me. I am saying to definitely use the information and work hand in hand with them, but I am not in favor of using it to tie our district with that. As a school board, we have that decision to do that or not. I know some districts are doing that and others aren't. What I also said was, when the governor gives the school board the individual decision and choice on what to do locally, and then we in turn go back and then tie it to this, you essentially are giving the power back to the county going off of that. There are several resources we look at when making these decisions, and working with them is one of them. But I am not in favor of tying it to that. That's never, as he said, it was never intended for a school to go off of using that. It's another tool to gather your information. But no, I don't believe, it's just like Sue's question. When she said, why is our level 1 or 2 and 3 tied together? We don't have to do that. Just like Upper Arlington, their level 1 is, their 1 and 2 are tied together. So they're back in school 5 days a week. Their number 3 then is hybrid, and then their number 4 is school closed. So we have that right to make our own individual decisions.
I agree with you on, we have the right to make our own. I just want to know, what data would we use to make that decision?
Well, we would look at that data, but it's just like what we're using right now to make the decisions. The CDC, the American Pediatric Association, the Ohio Department of Health will use that information, the Ohio Department of Education. You gather all that information, but I don't want to be tied to this color-coded system, because the data is skewed when you tie it to your county.
Well,
We need to look at individual zip code, individual cases in our community. As he pointed out, that's important to look at.
Let me pull us back in. I'm going to come back to Mr. Hostler. Tom, you did a fantastic job with the presentation on the whys. Obviously, the hows, and like you mentioned, the staff and administration will dig into the weeds and make it work. Do you have anything else to say, Tom, before I open up for discussion?
No, just thank you. And we look forward to, taking a big step forward and getting school back in session. So.
Okay, at this point then, I would like to open up for questions for Mr. Hostler, and now, of course, discussion amongst the board. You did a good job, Tom. Perhaps you could.
It is that as far as questions. I mean, I know we've all seen the questions each other have asked. We've all had our own individual discussions with Tom. We've discussed this before. I don't know that I have any more questions at this time, although I'm glad we're not making a decision. I'm not making a decision today. Certainly going to take all the time through the weekend. But I do think, the work in front of us, the important consideration for me is giving the community, giving the parents, the teachers, the staff, the clarity of what are we going to do by Monday. You know, people need time. We're in the shadow of opening these schools, and I appreciate that there can be debates over tying to color code systems, not tying. You know, what are the real leading indicators versus lagging indicators? We need to look at to be flexible, as Mr. Hostler and Dr. Beatty said, but I don't want to see us. I'm not going to get wrapped around the chain too terribly much on what that future flexibility looks like, as much as I am what is the decision we need to make that impacts people in the next 4 to 8 weeks.
Hey, Eric, what is Penna doing?
Penna is opening up fully,
Wow, really?
but you know, I say that with also the caveat, because like all of us, we're paying attention to what's going on in Sylvania. We're paying attention to what's going on over at Lake. Ottawa Hills, as Tom had mentioned, and I actually spoke with a Lake Board member last night after kind of hearing what their plan was, and he gave me some great advice. You know, as we're looking at it, every school system should be doing what is important to their school system. So
totally
they're nice reference points, but you know, and there'd be nice to see some strong coordination. But at the end of the day, what is important to Perrysburg and our community is what should be driving the decisions.
One of the things
So-
I want to point out, or from where I'm at, when I have to make decisions on a topic that is so unknown to me, I read, listen, watch, learn. And you can take articles from both sides of the coin, both sides of the story. And I finally have to look back at, you know what, I'm not the expert. So what are the experts? What does Ben Beatty see every day and deal with every day in his environment? Not the same thing that I do as a member of the board. Or Superintendent Hostler, what is he listening to and seeing, and who is he talking to, and all the things that he's doing? So that's one of the things that I'll gauge my support and decision on how we're going to function as a school system here in Perrysburg. And quite frankly, other school districts are all going hybrid. I learned yesterday Sylvania Southview's plan was turned down. They have to go back to the drawing board. Looks like it's going to be hybrid. And all the decisions I've made in my career, and as now a board member in the last 5 years, has been what's best for Perrysburg. And that's on Monday what I'll make that support decision on the plan. And I will want to also point out that parents have a decision too in our community. And we've allowed them to make a decision based upon what we're going to roll out Monday. And I don't know if we spoke too much to it, but they could make a decision to do an online academy. Is that correct, Mr. Hostler?
That's correct. So we'll have more information about that, but Perrysburg is offering a full online remote option for those families that desire that. So, and they'll still be Perrysburg students and enjoy all the rights and privileges that come with that. But we've thought about those students and we want to take care of them. It's important to us.
And I think that's something that's part of the equation is the parents raise their kids, they send them to school. We can make the plan, we can design the plan, but the parents can make the decision what plan they want to follow. And I think that's, the risk factor I'm hearing from Ben Beatty. I've always made decisions based upon risk, and everybody has a different risk factor. But as a board member, I'm going to listen to those folks that are out there in the battlefield dealing with this virus and the expertise that they have versus myself. And also look at what's best in interest for our students when it comes to the education piece. And I will just go on record right now saying I do like the plan because we are working toward getting them in 4 days, with that remote day being for our educators to have some time to get together and plan, to have some time to collaborate, and also to have those students who need some extra help, who have underlying health conditions, that meet face-to-face, or the disability child to meet face-to-face on that Monday. So I'm just telling you right now, it's not Monday yet, but next 48 hours, things could change with the virus, with what we see. But like Ben says, it is decreasing. And maybe by August, when we start school, we'll find ourselves in level 1 where we're going to go to school 4 days a week.
I have a question, but I do want to say something, and I honestly appreciate Ben's input and his information. But it is, when you look at what he is saying, he is looking at the data of the virus. And so I think possibly it's one-sided, where we could have had somebody in the mental health profession coming on and talking about how important it is to get children back in school. So they look at it as just data-driven for the virus and not the other component, which is just as important to parents and students. And again, having a child in the district, I look at it both ways: the educational component, mental health component, and weigh the risk that I'm willing to take for my family. But I do have a question, Tom. When we go and think about this over the weekend, how flexible is this color-coded, level 1 and 2 are together, then level 3 and level 4? Is that something moving forward we can discuss, or when we vote on Monday, that is what it is? We cannot look to combine, level 1 and 2, which would be open 4 or 5 days a week. Level 3 would be hybrid, and then level 4 would be the purple, which we would have to all stay home.
I think that, ultimately the board would need to make a decision as to what it would want to do. And I know you said earlier that you don't want to tie it to any levels. So that could be an option for the board. Restructuring how we're setting up the levels. If we did want to tie it to the levels, as you just described, we could do it that way. I'm not sure, moving, I don't know how frequently it's going to be moving from level 3 to level 2 and then back up to level 3. And if we say, level 3, and level 1 and 2 are 5 days a week back, or 4 days a week back, with all the students there. And then the next week it jumps up to level 3, then that's disruptive to parents, because now we're going backwards. And I know Ben was pretty clear that he liked the ability, flexibility was important for him. And he liked the fact that let's start and adjust either way as we move forward. So I think, to answer your question, the board can choose whatever path they would like to. Our recommendation is this, because I think it provides more stability to families, and it lets families know, what to expect, where to look. And I don't know, moving away from that, at what point, what would board members look at? So if we jump up 15 cases in a week, does the board have a special meeting and say, oh, we better move here? Or if we go down 15 cases, do we, in our zip code, do we meet? So I'm not clear, how the process, because, we really need to talk about the process and how those triggers would happen. And so if we move away from that, yeah.
Well, if
So if
our
we move
intent
away
is
from-
truly to get children back in school, then the option of combining the level of 1 and 2 would then meet that requirement. So I'm not saying
But
we could create our own color-coded system like Sylvania is doing that's not tied to Wood County's alert system. That's what I would prefer, because then it is in our hands and our looking at the data specifically, and not toward the county, which would skew it, looking at something like Bowling Green with the students coming back. That's my concern.
Well,
And once you tie it to that, then it's out of our hands. And that's, we're here as school board members to make these decisions.
I'd like to jump in here just for a second. I went to the Academy of Pediatricians, and I looked at their guidelines. And if you go, it's a very short bullet point guidelines. We are almost 100% in their guidelines, which is why I'm really in favor of this system. They talk about cohorts staying together. They talk about the difficulty for junior high and high school. They talk about maybe going to block scheduling. I asked Mr. Hassler to explain how you get to block scheduling. And it's not something you just do overnight. You can't just say, okay, we're opening the doors for block. because it requires different teaching skills. It requires a lot of professional development to do. But I really urge all of us to go to the American Academy of Pediatricians and read their full article on what data, what your system should look like. And I think as I look at every school, at school districts over the worldwide, the thing that everyone is saying consistently is gradually do it. Don't jump in, gradually open. So I think for us to start with this system, say, oh my gosh, look, we have not had a single case. We can easily move forward into a different, but right now we've got to give our staff a system. We've got to give them what is school going to look like in August. And I think to err on the side of caution is the best place to be. The American Pediatric Association takes into account the mental health of the child and the educational. So go read their directives and see if you agree with me that we are really following those.
Well, I agree with the fact is that I think we need to be proactive, like Ben said, up front. And I think, Kelly, you mentioned get the kids back to school. We are going to get them back to school, maybe not 5 days. But the other thing is too, I think my goal as a board member is to get them back in school safely. And that's the key, is to eliminate as much risk as possible. We do that for playgrounds. We do that for the hallway. We do that for programming we have, for bullying, for our Jack Away program. We look at being proactive. And if this school board wants to be proactive, I think we need to make sure that we can start out slow and then expand versus go full boat. Now we've got these cases, now we're shut down, and then the CDC can come in and close a building down. So I agree with Gretchen. I think I know where I'm at with respect to let's get the kids to school, let's follow the plan, let's tie it to something and tie it to where the experts are telling us we're at level 1 or level 2 or level 3.
Yeah, Ray, if I can jump in, one, I need to clarify and Sue for your question. Penn is only open 4 days, not 5. So sorry about that. My phone lit up there for a second. So thanks to all who corrected me on that. And sorry for any confusion I caused. And Gretchen, Ray, I kind of agree with you. My orientation is certainly to that plan that is least disruptive to the parents, the students, and the teachers of the school district. And I think this plan is the one that does give us the most flexibility to be able to adjust cautiously rather than opening up the valve fully, cracking the valve, doing that classic plan, do, check, act based off of information as it comes in, with, again, the flexibility to make the moves that we need to make.
And I do believe also, Mr. Hostler mentioned that if we brought him back 100%, everybody back in, that really wouldn't be following the plans with ODE, CDC, and APA. Like Gretchen, to your point, if we bring them back 100%, that's not following the guidelines as I interpret it.
Well, if you follow the guidelines that say, do not come to school if you're sick, have a fever, all those things. So you have those teachers, kids not coming to school. If you wash your hands and if you have hand sanitizer, that's one thing. If you wear a mask, everybody wears a mask, that's, another thing. And then social distancing. If you can do all those 4 things, that's like you're in front of the game, and that's what we're going to recommend, and that's what all these guidelines say to do.
Kelly, let me ask you a question in regards to a student who has a health condition that they cannot come to school.
Yes.
They have to do remote learning, but they do want to see their teacher once a week, or that child who's fine, but yet the parents and the child aren't comfortable coming to school. So they still want to see their teacher once in a while. And plus the staff, looking at it from the staff's viewpoint, to give them that time through the week so they can collaborate, so they can get it together. If we do have a shutdown, again, being proactive on the staff's end, I'm looking at that also as another reason why I think that this plans are looks like a pretty good plan, 4 days a week if we can get them to school. How do you feel about that from the staff and allow them to have some time to do that collaboration?
So just 4 days a week?
If we
Is
can
that
get
what you're
them in,
asking me?
get them in 4 days a week, are you in line with that Monday where the staff is working, they're doing the things they need to do to make this program work for the remote learning and be prepared for if something happens down the road where we are shut down? Are you want them going
Yes.
5 days a week?
Well, I see other schools, so many other schools that are incorporating the remote learning, like let's say in Upper Arlington, but in their level 1 and level 2, they are going back 5 days a week. So I understand it, but I also don't understand why we just can't go back 5 days a week as opposed to 4. But if I had to choose between 2 and 4, then yes, I would choose 4 and give that 1 day for remote learning for students who wanted to come in. But when I asked the question, if we even knew how many people wanted to come in, Tom said you didn't. So we're making accommodations for things that we don't know the answer to, because I would assume if I had a child that was at risk and I was uncomfortable coming in, I would be uncomfortable coming in regardless if anybody was there. So I would choose not to even use that day as an option.
Well, I happen to have a good friend who has a special needs child. She is so excited about that 1 day. She said to her, that makes all the difference because she knows that if she keeps her child home, that they will have that opportunity for special services for, special needs children often need therapy, speech therapy, occupational therapy. And if they have that 1 day that they feel safe entering the building, she said that meant the world to her. But that's just one parent. But my
Correct.
bigger question is, how do we socially distance the high school? How do we get the lunchroom? How do we get the class sizes? Bringing all the kids back, how do we get the class sizes down to 15? How do we do that?
I've thought a lot about that. And since we are not going to offer buses for high schoolers, you can have a staggered start time. You could have kids start at 8 o'clock and then a whole nother group start at 8:30. They never go in the hallway together. They never have lunch together. So essentially you're running 2 different schedules the entire four days.
But we
Has
have
anybody thought of that?
we have freshmen taking sophomore, junior, and senior level courses. So which one do they go with? I'm in French 4 as a sophomore. I'm in
Well, how do you know you couldn't have a schedule that they would fit in group A and group B? I'm not saying don't interchange those students. I'm just saying have 2 different groups come. So you have like an 8 o'clock start and then you have an 8:30 and you're never in the hallways at the same time. You're never, another option that we look at, I spoke to somebody who has a senior and they're like, my daughter just needs 3 credit hours. Like, why don't you look at all the seniors, look at exactly what they need to graduate, have them just do those classes to graduate that they need. They need 3 credit hours, get in, get out, done. I think you'd have a lot of students that are like that are
Right.
almost graduated. You could be a junior and only need a couple credit hours. There's so many kids that are going to take the college credit plus. I think we haven't really looked at all. This is the time where you have to look outside the box. You have to be innovative. Someone sent me an email about renting those big, huge tents. And just that same day, I see an article in the Wall Street Journal about a school doing that. They're moving things outside. They're going to use their gyms. They're going to use their auxiliary gyms. They're going to use the.
where are we going to get the teachers? That's what I want to know. If we're going to, let's say we decide to rent 50 tents. We put in 50 more classrooms. We now have to hire 50 more teachers. We
It's
can't.
the same thing. It's just spread out more. That's why you're saying we
No,
can't have
but-
everybody in
Okay.
because of the space we have. So if you have
Right.
the same amount of teachers, we've just increased the space so we can have all the students at the same
But
time.
my classroom has 30 children in it. It has 30 children. So I'm going to split them. I'm going to have 15 for my classroom, and I'm going to have 15 out in the tent. Who teaches the kids in the tent? My classroom has 30, I have 30 children in my charge. 30 freshman English children. 15 are in my classroom on Monday, on Tuesday, a different 15 on Wednesday. But now, if we're all going at the same time, I have 15 in my classroom and 15 in the tent. Who teaches the children in the tent?
Well, I would think the bigger classrooms, when you go out in the tent, you're outside and you can spread out more. So potentially you could still have the exact same kids, but you're outside, you're wearing masks. No one's coming to school that's sick because we're following these guidelines, fever, no cough, no whatever. And then you're spread out more. So you can have all those same kids, but you're in a bigger space.
So everybody's going to be in tents.
Well, no, but then you have not everybody has that many kids in the classroom.
Well, wait a minute, correction, Kelly. You need to talk with Mr. Hostler and Dr. Short. The question that you asked about staggering, the comment you made, I thought about the staggering thought too. I tell you what about staggering starts, staggering bells. But the bottom line is when they get in the classroom, like Gretchen's saying, there are a lot of classrooms in the high school, 26 or greater. So tents, like Gretchen says, and all these other ideas, they have been expressed. And I want to, again, give our administration and Superintendent Hostler and Price the credit for going through since May and looking at this reopening plan. Your thoughts and the community's thoughts have been expressed. But like Mrs. Downs says, how can you do it? And then let
How do
alone,
these other people do it? I mean, a lot of people are thinking outside the box and coming up with these great creative ideas. And then all I hear is we can't. Well, I know we can't because other people are doing it.
Other people in Northern California are putting up tents, though. I don't know how well that works in Northwest Ohio in February.
I look at the security part too. We talk about security and safety for our students, and yet we've got tents set up. How does that work? I mean, there's so many factors, but again, I want to go back as a board member and look at that's what we charge the superintendent and his staff to do. They've got to get into the weeds and figure things out. What we're told by the CDC, ODE, the governor, the folks that are into this every day is that we have to social distance. We have guidelines. And so the high school and junior high school, they have quite a few students. I don't know what you keep bringing up Upper Arlington. I do not know their student population, but I do know
It's
that
more than ours. It's more than ours. I think they're at 2,000.
for their high school alone.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well,
Carmel, Indiana has like 7,000 high school students and they are opening up.
well, that's the decision the board will make on Monday.
Right.
And all of us will have that to weigh in. But I'm just saying that some of the things that you bring up they're good things. They're good thoughts because they have been expressed before. But remember, we want the kids back in school. We want them back 5 days. That's what I'm hearing from Mr. Hostler. But let's, like Ben Beatty just told us, let's take a proactive approach to getting them back in school safely. And so let's have some guidelines. And personally, I'm okay with the charts telling us, you know what, I'm going to wear a mask if I go to Oh Dear or Mr. Freeze or wherever I'm at and try to protect myself and others. But anyway, how about anybody else? Any other questions or points of discussion? I do know this, Kelly, when you talk about Upper Arlington,
Mm-hmm.
I know there's a difference between their finances and ours. They spend about $6,000 more per student in education. So I don't know, we have to be careful again when we compare ourselves to other school districts. And we need to do what we need to think about is what's best for what we have here in Perrysburg.
Well, I'm just looking at how they're opening up their school and what they're doing and what they're using and not tying it to the county coded system. I mean, it's just like looking at Dublin. I mean, they're a bigger school.
Yeah, I don't mean to jump in, but we lost Sue. So being a board meeting, I think we need to pause until we can get Sue back. So this is one of the
Tom, I believe
nuance.
Sue had another commitment, so I don't know that she's able to come back.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Very good.
Tell us.
I just noticed that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's, as we move into the next phase with the how, there's lots of things that are going to be offered. I know that Dr. Short and his team is looking at early release for expanding that program for seniors can do early release. We're expanding that to juniors, and that will be, shared, how we're doing the course offerings. There's a lot of things that are going to be done, but the complexity of the logistics of 1,700 students that have to have courses, have to have an adult with them, limits, how we are able to do things. And we also have to keep in mind that if there is a opportunity to flip the switch and go back, we have to have that schedule be uninterrupted, and students can very easily flip back. So it's a challenge in terms of, how do we create that space and what we have. And, the Ohio State University, very creative people, lots of resources available. They're limited with what they can do because at the end of the day, there's a logistic issue in terms of what we can do. And I think, Gretchen, your point of, staggering starts, you're still putting 1,700 kids who need certain required courses, who sign up for those. And if you're teaching a class in a half an hour, the other students aren't available. How do you manage that? I mean, we've explored that. We've talked about that. We've talked about shifts, having the students come in. Now we're talking about, bringing in half the students going, in the morning, and then a second shift going into the afternoon, dividing up the class that way. But to pull that off, we start talking about reducing electives and things like that. And in January, if things change and we can bring all the kids back, we can't bring those electives back. You can't start French 4 if we eliminate that and automatically start it in February. So we're trying to build for that flexibility to the best of our abilities. So it's not a matter of us wanting to say no. It's a matter of us saying, we looked at that, we thought about it. We have legitimate issues with being able to do that idea. And so we want to be able to come up with a way to get as many kids in, but we also heard we have to be cautious with what we're doing, and not, and not be in a situation where we're having the school shut down, and remembering what that Ben said about, doing that. So, but at any rate, I feel better that Sue had to jump off. So sorry about that.
But your point about what Dr. Beatty said, this is now the second time I've heard from a medical expert that putting 30 kids in a classroom is not a good idea. The other one being the superintendent summit that you put together, Tom, with the doctor from ProMedica. And when asked the question directly, just can't get over, her response was essentially, yeah, I just would not do that. Those are pretty meaningful data points, pretty meaningful takeaways for me.
Mr. Hassler, is it possible, perhaps, if a board member wanted to go to the war room where Dr. Short is located on scheduling, so they could see the mechanics behind the difficulty of some of the thoughts that are out there? And Kelly, to your point, not to say no, but there are very good, valid things to bring up, like the tents or this, that, the other thing. But the actual nightmare of scheduling and the size of the classes, Perrysburg High School, it's difficult to do some of the things that have been mentioned, other than the plan that's been presented. Is that something?
Yeah, someone just sent me a text that said, with a link to an article in Indianapolis, that Carmel High School reopened under the hybrid plan. So I think things are changing in a lot of spaces. And again, I think it comes back to, it's good to know what these other districts are doing. It's It's good to know what options are out there and exploring if we can do that. But at the end of the day, we have to make a decision what works for us. And so it's good to know what these other folks are doing. But like I said, things are changing weekly. And, you know, that school in Indianapolis that you mentioned, they are starting in the hybrid, according to this news article here. So maybe that changed. And that's the thing, that flexibility, responding to things. So
I think it's just their high school that's going hybrid, not 7th,
Yeah.
8th grade.
which is what we're proposing to do as well for the most part. Because our elementaries
7th and 8th grade.
are, I haven't looked at their plan, and, you know, we'll
Yeah.
see what we know what we're doing, and we know what we feel we need to do to keep our educational program where it is. So
In my, what I would like to see us devoting our time to is, one, get a plan. And then after we get that plan, let's build in, how can we think out of the box? How can we do things differently? How can we make online learning as rigorous as possible given the fact that we get to see the children every other day? Those are the kinds of questions that we need time right now to really be focusing on. Do we need to bring teachers in for more staff development on how to best utilize those 2 days you have and 2 days of online or 3 days of online? Those are the things we need. That's why we need to make a decision now, because we do need to think out of the box, Kelly. You are absolutely right. We do need to think out of the box, and we need to make what's best for Perrysburg students the best it can possibly be. And it's just everything within me says, let's get a plan, let's all get behind it, and then let's see how we can creatively put that plan to good use.
And Mrs. Downs, when you say the plan, we have an outline, and Monday we'll make that final decision on that plan. But as far as thinking out of the box, that would be for our Mr. Hostler and the staff. Is that what you're thinking, or is that you're talking about the board when you say we?
No, I'm talking about the entire the entire school population. I'm talking about the board providing the funds to do what the teachers say they need. Our role is simply to provide support for what they need. Obviously, they are going to be the ones who decide how to make it work. And our job is, how do we provide the funds to make this work? How do we provide the time to make this work?
I agree.
I agree. I'd probably add to that, in addition to the, strengthening remote learning, is strengthening the emotional support that I'm hearing. And these letters are receiving and talking with parents. It's the other side of this. There's the distance learning improvements, and there's also, we know that this is not easy. I'm a father. I have a child in the school system right now too, and I personally see the toll that it takes on these students, these children, from the distancing. So, we need to be devoting our efforts to figuring that out as well.
Did we just have a discussion about that Monday? We all, Kelly, you understand about what the purpose of Mondays would be for the staff?
Yes, but I am still in favor of giving the parents an option to choose what day would best work for their schedule on a survey. That is what I would like to see done. I think their voice matters, and asking them what day would work best, as opposed to the district just saying it's Monday, I think would help the community understand and have a voice in what day, if we were going to go with a 4-day a week. As we've discussed, they have this model called the 2-1-2. Your child goes on Monday, Tuesday. Wednesday would be the deep cleaning day. Wednesday would be, the first group of students go. So two, one group A, then Thursday, Friday would be group B. So you have 2 consecutive days, 2 days the teachers are seeing those kids, 1 deep cleaning day, and then the next group comes. That's called the 2-1-2. The other option is to keep it on Monday, if you guys are set on a Monday, but then give the option of Monday's the day, and either we do a 2-2 again. Tuesday, Wednesday, same group of kids, same consistency, then Thursday, Friday. If you're talking disease-wise and not spreading it, that makes complete sense.
Kelly,
You said,
have you seen other, just like all these people who have these different plans, did they all ask their parents, okay, what do you want to do? Or did they come up with the plan and they just have the plan? I think
No, if you look at Upper Arlington, the surveys and the research they did with the focus groups, they asked. Dublin, they asked. You can get on their websites and you can see all the questions on what they asked their survey. Yes.
I did
Upper
not.
Arlington's stance is your voice matters. They wanted the parents to have a choice
Did you read?
because they're going to be the ones that are driving. They're going to be the ones that are going to take the day off work. So all I'm saying is, what does it hurt to give the community a choice? And if you guys don't want to do that, we don't do that. I'm just saying, what does it, what's the hurt in asking?
I mean, we did survey parents. So people who are watching, I just want to make sure that they know that we did it. We did a survey with parents and we didn't ask that
Absolutely.
specific question, but, and we were one of the few districts that had the open-ended question. And I'm not sure if Upper Arlington has released their total plan yet when I checked their website, but again, they're one of 610 school districts in Ohio. And, I'm not sure where they stand. And at this point, it doesn't matter for us and what we need to do. And I'd be happy to share the feedback from staff on that. I know from the elementary parents or elementary teachers perspective, having a Tuesday off or a Wednesday or a Thursday off is a significant disruption. They want those students in day after day to get into that routine, to build on that. Because with younger students, especially, there is that kind of, restarting, getting back into the school mode. So that was the feedback we heard. So we've had those conversations, but certainly the board can choose to go in a different direction, and that's fine.
well, and
I know, but when you have the 2-1-2, then the whole district has the benefit of going consecutively. That would make, again, I'm looking at it as a whole, that would make more sense. Yes, the elementary would be broken up by a Wednesday for the deep cleaning, but when you're looking at also the other grades, then they have the option of going consecutively. And then when you're thinking disease-wise with those, 7 through 12 coming in and doing the deep cleaning in midweek just makes more sense. My question is, what is the harm in asking? I feel like as a board, it's always like, well, we couldn't possibly do that. Well, yes, I have seen other districts do it. Get on their website and look at their survey. And yes, they have asked, what option will work best for your family? So
I
that
think
would be my suggestion. If we want to move forward with it, whatever.
well, here's where I think we're at. Monday's here soon. We've had this roll out since May. We're discussing different options and researching different things. We've got a plan. I think we come up with a format like Mr. Haas's presented. Let his staff, let the teachers, let the administration make the best educational decision. If they feel this plan or that plan with respect to Monday or Wednesday, I don't think that's my role as a board member. That's what the experts in the educational field can do. I'm saying we need the framework. And so by Monday, we're going to adopt a framework. Tom has submitted the framework to us for a plan that he's worked on with staff since May. And I think if we have any more questions, we can ask. If we have any more discussion, we can continue, or we probably can wrap things up in the next 48 hours. We'll have some more answers and some of our questions if we have any before Monday's meeting. But I would suggest, though, Kelly, if you can stop and see Dr. Short or Mr. Hostler take you over, or however you work that out, or Mrs. Downs or Mr. Bennington, to see how that works with scheduling and how many bodies are in a classroom at any given time, and to follow the social distancing the recommendations. It's very difficult to do when you have over 26 students in the classroom. But with that, are there any other questions about the plan presented by Mr. Hostler? Okay, well then, Monday we'll meet in face-to-face. Are we good with that?
Sounds great.
Kelly, will you be there?
Yes, I will be here.
Okay, I thought you were on vacation.
Well, I will be here remotely. Absolutely.
No, I meant, would you be here face to face? But you
Face
will
to
be
face
there.
on Zoom. Yes.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Sure.
We'll meet down, the board will meet in the
Sounds great.
Kelly, you'll be on Zoom. You won't be here in person Monday, correct? You'll be on Zoom.
That is correct. I will be doing Zoom.
Correct. Okay. All right. With that, do we have a motion to adjourn today's special meeting?
Motion. Second.
And before I ask for roll call, again, I want to thank you, board members, for attending today's special meeting and for all the careful thought that you're giving into the plan. Mr. Hostler and your staff and Mrs. Price, I can't thank you enough because I've said this before. I hope that the two of you are getting some chance to recharge and staying healthy yourselves, because I know, again, because I hear and see, and the board knows what you are doing daily with this pandemic that goes beyond a normal superintendent's role. We're all dealing with a world of unknowns right now, and I just appreciate you and Mrs. Price and the staff for all you're doing. With that, roll call, please, Mrs. Harrington.
Mr. Bennington,
Yes.
Mrs. Eubank,
Yes.
Mrs. Downs,
Yes.
Mr. Pullman,
Yes.
and we know Miss Larimer left.
Okay, the meeting is adjourned, and we'll see you all Monday.